Dragon's Dogma was over a decade ahead of its time, and its combat at its peak stands among some of the greatest 3D combat systems ever made. However, incredible as this game is, it's the upcoming sequel that we really need to keep an eye on, because Dragon's Dogma 2 may be Capcom's next masterpiece. Well, there are three aspects to it, and after looking at each one individually, we'll be able to see how they fit together to create a one-of-a-kind experience that you really will struggle to find elsewhere. Let's start with the pawns. So, in a totally different dragon-related game, there was actually a mildly similar system to this. You went to this desk right here and you asked them for certain types of party members. It was in this way that you were able to craft your own party made up of custom characters that you chose. This system was great at the time, but the pawn system in Dragon's Dogma feels almost like a natural evolution of this already interesting idea. See, the pawns in Dragon's Dogma can be hired at this little stone. They're custom characters that you take with you on your journey, pretty similar to Dragon Quest. Where things differ and where the pawn system really starts to shine lies in its depth. When you start Dragon's Dogma, you're given this character creator where, if you can believe it, you create a character. The true twist comes when you finish customizing your character. Only a few minutes of gameplay later, you're jump scared by a second character that you have to customize as well. This second character is your pawn. This pawn is nearly as customizable as you are. They're limited to a few less classes than you, but outside of that, you can change their weapons, armor upgrades, and even their special attacks and skills. This is effectively a second player character. Here's where it really gets special though. Each player, as in every human being behind the screen, makes their own pawn. Now, I know what you're thinking. Didn't we already establish that fact earlier? Well, yes, but not only do you make your own pawn, but the pawns that you recruit are those very same player-made pawns. This social aspect adds so much to the game. Now, when you build your pawn throughout the game, you're doing so with the knowledge that there's a good chance somebody else is going to use them. This obviously further incentivizes you to make your pawn as good as possible, but it also adds something else that you might not immediately notice. Not only are these pawns from other players, but their levels and abilities scale to those players. This means that you don't have to grind these pawns that you recruit from other players. But what I love about this system is that it almost acts as a demo for other vocations. For now, all you need to know is that vocations are basically just classes. You have to level up these vocations to get skills and upgraded forms, but thanks to pawns, you can simply hire one with a vocation you're interested in and actually see that vocation in action without having to gain a single experience point. It's in this way that you can spend your time leveling up one vocation while still getting a rough idea of what to look forward to if you do choose to invest in a different one. Crucially though, these pawns are scaled to your level. You're able to hire stronger pawns, but there's a limit to that, and generally speaking, the pawns you'll use will be around your level. So even though they have the ability to showcase classes that you haven't personally unlocked yet, they're never gonna break the game by being too powerful. What truly makes the pawn system so incredible is this level of total customization. You get to decide exactly what your team is gonna look like, and you can adjust that team whenever you need to. The design decision to have these pawns be player created grants you an effectively limitless pool of characters to choose from. But as great as the pawn system is, it doesn't stop one of the biggest problems in gaming that tragically also affects Dragon's Dogma. Fortunately, thanks to today's sponsor ExpressVPN, that problem can be avoided. Let me explain. Imagine a game that you're really excited about that comes out on July 15th. Well, you might be surprised to see some people streaming and playing that very game on the 14th. The reason for this is something that actually frustrates me quite a bit: time zones. Now, to be clear, I don't hate time zones. I hate release schedules based on those time zones. Simply put, 1 PM here in New York City is actually 5 AM in Sydney, Australia, 5 AM on the 15th, meaning you'll be able to play the game there despite it technically being the 14th here. That's where ExpressVPN comes in. See, by changing your location to Australia, you're now on the 15th too, and now you can play that game a day earlier. You know, when you should have been able to play it in the first place? But to be honest with you, that's not why I use ExpressVPN. No, why I use ExpressVPN is for one simple reason: content. I'm a content creator. I make silly videos online and I love it, but I don't just love making content, I love watching it too. Christopher Nolan is one of my favorite directors, and one of his older movies that I haven't seen yet, called Memento, is actually on Netflix right now, if you live in the UK. And I do not live in the UK. Or do I? You see, ExpressVPN makes the answer to that question a bit more up to interpretation. With the simple press of a button, you can be anywhere in the world, and by extension, you can watch anything. For a more visual example, this is basically what the internet looks like without a VPN, and this is what it looks like with one. So why exactly would you not want all that extra content? Anyway, if you want more internet privacy along with the ability to unlock the ocean of content that's currently region locked, go to expressvpn.com/swooser to find out how you can get 3 months of ExpressVPN free. That's expressvpn.com/swooser. You can also just click the link in the description or the pinned comment. Back to the video. So now that we're done talking about your online safety, we can go back to talking about your in-game safety. One of the main reasons I fell in love with Dragon's Dogma in the first place was the customization available to the character. I briefly mentioned Vocations earlier, but I think it's about time we go more in depth. So like I said before, Vocations are classes. What makes these classes so great though is the absurd level of depth. It actually reminds me of the level of depth in Monster Hunter. In Monster Hunter, each weapon is so thoroughly developed that with just a few adjustments, you could probably make an entire game around them. And believe it or not, I think that statement is even more true here in Dragon's Dogma. Funny, it's almost like they were made by the same developer. The Vocations in Dragon's Dogma come in 3 different forms, each that branch off into an advanced version of themselves and mixtures of the others. Let's compare 2 classes side by side to really see what this looks like. The Strider class is all about speed. It's one of my favorite classes in the game, and a lot of people consider it to be the most fun just due to its absurd movement. With this class, you get a pair of knives and a bow. Each skill in this class is all about mobility, versatility, and speed. You get a roll, abilities that send you dashing in multiple different directions, and even a double jump. And remember, you don't have any defensive gear with this vocation like a shield, so your survivability with this class is based entirely on that mobility, just like how mine is based entirely on this funny number next to my name. To go along with this mobility, you're given quick, low-risk attacks. Things like Biting Wind, which despite being your most aggressive skill, is also one of your safest. And that really speaks to the idea behind this class. It's all about being so fast and aggressive that your opposition can't even begin to fight back. The bow really helps put a bow on top. The bow helps with fluidity. Thanks to the speed with which you can take out your bow and launch arrows, you never really have to stop attacking, even when your enemies begin to fly or run away. Now let's look at the opposite end of the spectrum with my personal favorite vocation, the Mystic Knight. This is a class with a sword and a large shield. You can also use a mace though. The Mystic Knight is a very bait and punish counter-heavy class. It's far less aggressive and mobile than the Strider, acting almost as a tank. You've even got a spell called Magic Cannon, so the whole motif kinda fits. In this class, you gain abilities that let you enchant your shield with certain elements, each of which will punish the enemy for attacking you. At a surface level, this is a cool idea that I haven't really seen anywhere else. However, the trend that carries through so much of this game is that the ideas aren't just conceptually good, but they're mechanically brilliant as well. You see, these shields make enemies stagger and deal a bit of damage if you block their attacks. Capcom thought that normal blocks are boring though, so if you time it just right, this is probably my favorite parry in any game. I mean, maybe something from Monster Hunter is in contention, but calling down a lightning bolt after a parry has to be one of the coolest things I've ever seen. Anyway, I think you can see how vastly different the approach to combat is for both of these classes, but it might surprise you to know that these are hardly the 2 most divergent classes in the game. The variance in combat with each different class is what makes the vocation system so brilliant, and while I could sit here all day and discuss the differences between each one, I'm pretty sure you already get the idea. But crucially, there is something we're missing here. The abilities available to the player don't matter if not for the abilities of the enemies, and most importantly, the bosses. The bosses in Dragon's Dogma are designed in a pretty unique way. The easiest way to describe this is by plucking one of them out of the game and taking a closer look at it individually. This is the Chimera. As you can see, it's got 3 different parts to it. Its tail is a snake, there's this weird goat thing on its back, and its body takes the form of a lion. Each of these parts have different abilities, and what's really cool about this fight is that they all have individual health bars. Attacking any part of the Chimera will deplete its overall health, but if you focus on one specific part more than the others, you can disable it. What makes this such a clever mechanic is that each of these parts specialize in a type of attack. The snake tail uses AoE poison attacks that can be a bit of a hindrance if you just ignore it. The goat, on the other hand, is a much more active threat. It has the ability to cast some pretty devastating spells. Naturally, the lion, being the main body, can't be killed without killing the entire monster, but it basically just charges and uses physical attacks. This adds a level of customization to the fight itself. If you don't care about the poison, you can ignore the snake and just focus on the main head. Or maybe you have great spell resistance but you don't want to deal with damage over time, so you instantly focus on the snake. What really ties all of this together is the ability to climb large monsters. This is probably the single most unique mechanic in Dragon's Dogma, and thanks to the bosses, it really does add an extra dimension to the combat. If you go back to the Chimera fight from earlier, you can pretty quickly see the applications of this ability. The goat head is pretty high up, so getting consistent melee hits on it can be tough, but thanks to the ability to climb, you're able to jump onto it and let loose. It really helps that you can actually use some of your special attacks while climbing. Most of the bosses in this game have some level of depth like this. The Cyclops takes extra damage if you attack its eye, but if you attack it too much it goes berserk. And this is taken a step further with the armored Cyclops, who wears a helmet to protect its key weak point. You can get around this by... actually, it's a pretty cool puzzle, so I don't want to spoil it. What's important to know is that the bosses in this game really do take advantage of the depth and abilities of the player by implementing their own tricks and small puzzles. So, pawns, vocations, and bosses. These aren't exactly new ideas. Dragon Quest and Disgaea have customizable recruits, every MMO under the sun has classes, and you can look at games from the same developer to see bosses that change based on how you fight them. Even climbing was first seen in Shadow of the Colossus. None of these reinvent the wheel, right? Well, here's why this works. It comes down to one single idea: customization. Think about it. The player is free to choose who's on their team and the builds of those teammates. They're able to customize their own character and playstyle to such an absurd degree that you're effectively playing a different game based on your class. Finally, it's thanks to the climbing and dynamically evolving boss fights that you're able to defeat your opposition in whatever way you choose. Every choice you make here is valid, every class is great, and the AI may have as many brain cells as you have party members, but they're not exactly pushovers either. These pieces individually don't break any new grounds, but when you put them all together like this, you get one of the best combat systems ever made. And this is why I said at the beginning that we really need to keep an eye on the upcoming sequel. If you ask anybody who played the first game, they'll tell you it wasn't perfect. For better or worse, the game was clunky, and there are large parts of it that were confusing or simply didn't make sense. However, if you look at what we've seen of the sequel so far, it looks to take these ideas that we saw in the first game and expand upon them. We've already seen glimpses of this in fights like the Talos, where you're able to climb, launch artillery, or even use your own projectiles to damage it. And speaking of climbing, that system seems to have been upgraded as well, with the added ability to jump while you climb. We're also able to see this same boss interacting with the environment by launching a spear to destroy a bridge. The Vocations system seems to be improved upon as well, with new classes that are just as unique, if not more so, than the first game. The Trickster is a perfect example of this, as it's a class that looks like it barely even attacks. Instead of confronting enemies directly, they play a more support-heavy role, confusing enemies and even making them fight each other. Lastly, we've been told that the pawn system has even better AI along with more overall depth, and quite frankly, that's all it really needed considering how fundamentally great this system is to begin with. Dragon's Dogma 2 looks to be an expanded, upgraded, and evolved version of the first game, but more importantly, Dragon's Dogma 2 took its time. It's a game that's been in the works for nearly 5 years from a developer that's larger now than they've ever been. It's the sequel to one of their most underrated hidden gems that looks to have just as much polish as their current industry-defining success stories. And it's because of all of this that Dragon's Dogma 2 may well be Capcom's next masterpiece.